Welcome back, everyone, to the B-BBEE Chamber podcast. Super excited to be back. This is our second episode for this year. We're moving very swiftly into 2025, and I'm pretty excited to be recording our next episode of the B-BBEE Chamber podcast. And we've got a very special guest with us today, one of our senior B-BBEE consultants at the B-BBEE Chamber. Miguel, how are you doing? Are you well?
Finding yourself, Neil.
Great stuff. Super excited for you to be here in our session today. I've been looking forward to our session, to having a discussion with you regarding a few things within the transformation space. But before we get into that, tell us a bit about yourself, your role at the B-BBEE Chamber, but also your history. You also got quite a wealth of experience within the B-BBEE transformation space.
I think, I can't recall the year off the top of my head, but I started out in the industry as a transformation intern at Timber Investment Corporation, and I will always say, I'm grateful for that opportunity because if anything, it kind of gave me a real life exposure and experience of the transformation space. And I started as an intern, worked my way up from there to a consultant, and left the consulting space for a while and became a analyst at BDO. And then unfortunately COVID came around in that day, which put a stop on a lot of things. And then I think when things opened up again, and then I came back into the consulting space and also assisted a bit with skills development, and that there, one of my previous roles was more aligned to skills, or had a big emphasis on skills development. And then subsequent to that, I've ended up at the Chamber where I am a senior consultant at the moment, covering a wide range of different things. So from strategy development, assisting our clients with strategy development, and also on the implementation side of things, so tracking and managing bursaries, learnerships, enterprise and supply development programs, as well as socioeconomic development programs. Quite interesting, quite busy. I like to think that every day for me is quite exciting, and getting exposed to how the various organizations and that are going about their transformation journey. And that's me in a nutshell, I think.
No, awesome. No, thank you for that. I think it's been quite a journey for you. You've learned a lot through your experience, and also you continuously learn. I continuously learn as well, especially in the line of work that we do. It's not always a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not always the same thing that you're going to see on a daily basis. It's always going to be something unique, something different, something that is going to be, that is going to allow you to think out of the box when approaching this. So our topics of today, of what we're going to be discussing, we're going to be talking about trends and predictions. And I'm going to maybe perhaps split the two apart. And I want to talk about, firstly, what have you seen in the last couple of years as the trend when it comes to approaching your B-BBEE transformation strategy from companies? Do you see it being more approaching it with the ROI mindset, making sure that there's impact on beneficiaries and business, or do you still see it as a compliance exercise? I mean, there are some companies out there that are still, doing what they're doing for B purposes based on compliance. So what are the trends that you've seen over the last couple of years?
I think in my experience, if I can say it's a 50-50. We in some instances we see that some companies have gradually shifted from doing the transformational BEE as a tick box exercise, and have now started focusing on the ROI and the actual impact on the end beneficiary of these initiatives, which in my opinion is the way we should be doing it. And I think there is still a lot of pushback in some industries and in certain sectors, and I think, in all honesty, what's put out there in the media and that there sometimes creates a lot of confusion and creates different opinions on what BE is and what transformation is. But I think that's where we come in as advisors, and to kind of shift that mindset from doing if I can say, transactional approach to BEE to a more transformational approach to BEE.
No, of course, and I think that it's important for us to educate. Us as the BEE Chamber are always sharing knowledge and education around certain topics, but also just the messaging around transformation and what we've seen happen throughout the last couple of years, and also just echoing what you mentioned, the 50-50 split. There's definitely a lot of companies that have become very mature with their transformation journey, versus some companies are just looking at it as from a compliance perspective and just continuing with that. Legislatively, one of the shortfalls we find is that if companies do what they need to do in terms of meeting the requirements, unfortunately, you still have to award them points on the scorecard, and that's how that system works. But we always encourage our companies and members to just go beyond that. Look at how best can you make an impact in terms of the beneficiaries, but also in your business. You are running and operating a business in South Africa. It needs to be some sort of ROI that is going to be benefiting you out of any of the initiatives being implemented. And that's not only with BE, but just generally how we run business. So that's quite interesting to hear from you. And what about predictions? 2025 is just starting up. We've got a whole year ahead of us. There's a lot happening within the transformation space. There's big topics of discussion when it relates to employment equity as well as the legal BE sector code of good practice. What else are you predicting that's going to perhaps happen this year in terms of transformation?
So I think my main prediction would be that BE and transformation is not going anywhere. If anything, it's just going to become a lot more enforced. And I think we can see that starting to happen, like you rightfully mentioned, in the changes with employment equity. We also got some of these sectors, like the legal sector, which have gazetted their codes recently. And so I think if anything, there's going to be a lot more push on compliance and enforcing of that compliance. And I think also if we look at the BE Commission, and also making mention of the ESD fund and all of that there, also just speaks to that from an enforcement perspective, government is gonna be pushing quite big on that there.
Yeah. It's going to be quite an interesting year. Some of the things that I'm looking forward to is definitely implementation of the legal BE sector code of good practice. Now, we recently also attended, one of the sessions, and there was a lot of clarity being provided in the session, but we're also hoping that it is going to be practical for implementation purposes. Remember that from our perspective, we always want to make sure that whatever we're doing and whatever we're advising on is going to be correct and it makes sense, because we also don't want to step outside of the law when it comes to the legislation. Everything needs to be according to the actual code of good practice. So we're looking forward to that implementation of the legal BE sector codes of good practice as well as further clarity. But any thoughts on other further sector codes of good practice? Do you see anything being released this year?
I don't really see much being released this year, and just given how long it took for the legal sector code to come out, I think talk about it started up 4 or 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and only in September of last year did we see that it got gazetted. And even with that being done, we see that there is still a lot of, friction around it from the industry and the various stakeholders. So I think the process of getting codes gazetted and that it takes a lot longer than we'd like, and also for amendments in that there. But I think the general consensus is that there is a more strategic alignment to achieving the overall objectives of what the codes are meant or set out to achieve when they were first brought out. And a lot of these sector councils are latching onto that there, and like I say, driving the enforcement of compliance. We see that a lot of the industries and even some of the government institutions, like I say, are also putting certain requirements, BE requirements on licensing and all of that there. So again, like I say, I don't think we'll be able to run away from the codes, and I think the best practice would be to utilize and embrace it and use it so that it makes sense from a business perspective, but also in the greater scheme of things. If we look at our country, there is quite a bit of things that we can do and some areas that we can improve on, and I think it's all about doing things properly, which will allow for us to achieve that end goal.
No, definitely, and I think that's important. I think we're always going to need this approach that is going to be beneficial for our country. When you're approaching anything with your business, driving some sort of economic growth, every decision that you make as a business, as an individual, feeds into our economy in some way. And that's something that we as the Chamber always try to advocate with our members. It does not mean that you're making a minute decision on a certain aspect within your business that there's no impact. There's definitely impact with all of those decisions. Now, speaking about predictions and also trends, for 2025 or what's going to be happening, how important do you think mindset for transformation is going to be for 2025, as in the individual? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question after you give me your answer.
So I think it's quite important. If I put it on a scale, I'd say about 101% out of 100. Because I think one of the greatest challenges that we do face when we look at the transformation is the mindset. There's a lot of misconception around what the codes are meant to achieve, and I speak also from my personal experience. The first time I came across this BE thing, and that it comes across it's very black versus white, and when actually in reality it's about creating, it's joining forces and working together to achieve a common objective. And I think it's I forgot. I lost my train of thought there. But I think it's quite important that we create synergy as we go with the implementation, and change the mindsets of everybody, and that is working in the industry, that is part of the implementation, the mind of the beneficiaries, because I think we also do have still a bit of a problem with entitlement, which again, like I say, leaves a sour taste in people's mouths as we go about the implementation of things. But mindset is going to be, I think, the greatest barrier that we need to overcome. And again, I think that we go back to education around the codes, education around the sector codes, why does BE exist, what the end goal is, and how we can work together to achieve that. I think mindset plays a big role.
Yeah, I mean, to me, mindset is super important, especially when you're a decision maker within a business, or even a decision maker within a certain area within a business. You make decisions that are either going to advance transformation or impede transformation. And if you don't have that necessary knowledge of what decision I'm making that's going to have an impact on transformation, you're most likely going to make a decision that is going to impede transformation, as in it's not going to be advancing. And that's something really important, that mindset, understanding why we've got BE, why we've got transformation legislation, what type of objectives we're trying to achieve. It's important to understand those concepts when you are in certain positions within business. So I'm hoping that for 2025, we do have mindset change in terms of approaching transformation as well as BE. I'm hoping that as well, our media can actually assist in terms of sharing the correct messaging. I mean, in the last week, we already see so many different articles in respect of what's happening in the US. There's a lot happening in terms of that messaging, and it then puts the spotlight in terms of our country, in terms of, the BE legislation is under the scope, and also there's a lot more happening now in that space. But I sometimes feel that, the media can also share messaging in a way that is obviously going to be really talking to the essence of what we're trying to achieve. Well, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it happens quite often in the media, and, we've had discussions as a team, and we've always said, sure, the media has not got this correctly down, and I don't know who they've been interviewing on this, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think you've actually touched on it. I think sometimes when we read some of the articles and listen to some of the interviews in that, and you're like, where did you find this person, or are they in the industry, or I think like I say, if the media can come to the party and actually spread the correct message. And I mean, everyone is entitled to an opinion in that day, but I think the essence lies in the accuracy and the truth of what the codes stand for and what they're set out to achieve. It's not a tool that's been created to kind of, weaponize the various races that we do have in our country. It's a tool to kind of create the perfect stew and, mix everybody up in this nice boiling pot that we've got here in South Africa, and kind of create the perfect recipe so that in 10, 15 years from now, we're not still writing the story of BE and trying to, redress the things of the past. I think also just going back to the thing about mindset, I think as much as individual mindset plays a big role, organizational mindset also plays a big role. But I think the two, the individuals that, especially the individuals that head up certain divisions in organizations, actually hold a lot of power in terms of that mindset. Because like you say, they are more times than not the guys that actually can enable or disable transformation.
Exactly.
And so their mindset's quite important. But I think with the approach that I like to take is try to highlight, or understand both sides of the story and highlight the pros and cons. I think myself being if I can say, beneficiary of BEE, but also just looking at my upbringing and I always like to say maybe I would be the perfect poster child for the Rainbow Nation, and just looking at how I grew up in terms of a diverse background, being exposed to the rich, the poor, and all of that there. And as the man on the ground, it's easy to achieve these things, and if we work together for a common cause. But I think the lines get a bit blurred when we start pushing our own agendas and personal agendas, which can then impact the effect and then have an impact on the impact of BEE and transformation initiatives.
No, of course, and I think that's where we need to separate and divide. When we see the legislation based on what it's trying to achieve versus then, personal decisions made by people that then have a negative impact on the legislation or have a negative outlook on the legislation. I mean, we've seen it so many times that, you see that the concept of BEE is associated with corruption. And it's always a topic of discussion. It's always a topic that has been discussed in different platforms. But that association is incorrect, because corruption can't be associated with this piece of legislation. It's the activities by people that is corrupt. And I think that's where people need to really understand the distinguishment being made between the two. In 2025, do you see a lot more monitoring taking place? I'm hoping so, but what do you think?
Definitely, I do expect a lot more monitoring from the BEE Commission and perhaps maybe the DTIC, but also I think SANAS might come down a lot more strict on verification agencies, which will then lead to the verification agencies being a lot more stricter in the way they conduct their verifications. And I think ideally what I'd like to see is a big push from the verification agencies, kind of rewarding tick box exercises and actually digging deeper into the initiatives to make sure that the objectives are actually being met. Because I think it is also quite easy these days to kind of mask a lot of things as BEE initiatives that don't actually meet the objectives and the criteria that they are supposed to set out. And I think we see it a lot in the SED space, as well as the enterprise and supply development space, where organizations kind of create these little smaller organizations under themselves with their own organizations, and kind of use that to channel funds and all of that, so that they get the points but the impact. And I want to say that if we use a practical example, it's going to get to the point where we can't really complain about the high levels of poverty, crime and all of that, if we actively making a decision not to make a difference or to play our part in that. And it goes deeper than the boardroom or the office in that day. It also applies to our daily lives in that day. If we can just embrace that spirit of Ubuntu and helping the next person in that day, irregardless of skin color, irregardless of race, gender, or anything like that day. And we see that collaborative effort will help us achieve so much more, a lot quicker, and we can all then share in the pie or in the cake at the end of the day. So I think that's going to be quite important. But I think the monitoring and tracking of it is what's going to inform or kind of, like I say, be that kick in the backside that's going to speed up the process of organizations actually doing things properly. Even if we look at what has happened in recent times, where organizations are found to perhaps maybe be engaging in fronting activities in that day, I don't think the repercussions or the implications are strong enough or heavy enough to drive home the message that this cannot continue.
Of
Because
course,
situations like that are what leaves a sour taste in the country's mouths, you know, and even the world as a whole. And when
Of course.
if somebody looks on the inside or from the outside in, and you see these kind of things happening under the legislation that's meant to kind of drive us forward, which is actually taking us a little bit backwards every time these things kind of happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that there, and also I think it is required also just to drive home the message of transformation, and especially if you look at elements like our employment equity and management control, where we still find that our designated groups are still very much underrepresented.
No, definitely. I think that you're sharing quite powerful messages and also powerful advice, to members out there, to viewers out there, just in terms of the mindset. And I think it always boils down to that mindset. To make that difference and to make that change, you need to be a decision maker. You need to make decisions for that to happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the mindset is going to play a role within 2025, as well as how is it going to be playing a role just in terms of the corporate culture, the business environment, and how that's going to then unfold for this year. I'm still super excited as well as optimistic about 2025. I do still see a lot of good things happening within the BEE transformation space. It's not always reported on, and that's why we don't really see it. But as soon as there's something negative attached to BEE legislation, or something new is coming into play that requires higher targets, for example, or something a bit more, difficult for business to achieve, it's always then shone in the spotlight when it comes to our media. So hoping that this year we might see a lot more good stories, great stories in terms of transformation and BEE. Miguel, some last words from you in terms of, any advice that you'd like to give our viewers based on, their transformation strategy or even their personal journeys. Anything you'd like to share before we start wrapping up?
So I think the most important thing is, like I said earlier, BE is not going anywhere. So I think the sooner we kind of embrace it, and where we don't know, ask questions.
Yeah.
And I am quite excited for the year ahead, because as much as we may mention that there's that 50-50 between, when companies are doing it as a tick box exercise versus actually wanting to make an impact. If I can say, especially over the last couple of months in that, and especially after going through a verification, we then see that organizations in that are slowly but surely shifting their mindset and starting to ask the right questions, and moving away from just ticking the boxes. I will always say also, generally what we find is that over the long run, non-compliance or trying to avoid complying ends up costing you more. Whereas if you do things right, and if you're able to kind of get it right from the get-go, and that you'll see that ROI in the long run comes back tenfold. And I also tell organizations, if, like you said, rightfully so, the media doesn't highlight the good that happens in the industry or around the BE initiatives in that way. So I try to tell organizations who have the platform, put yourself out there, sing your own praises. If you had a successful learnership program, put it out there, put it on LinkedIn, the graduation, and stuff like that there, because it's PR, it's free marketing, but you're ticking the boxes on BE, you're making an impact, and you're singing your own praises, and speaks to being a good corporate citizen, across the board, which is always good to be, especially if you want to do business with government, with the state, as well as international business, because BE comes across as something that's maybe specific to South Africa, because we've termed it as triple BE, Black Economic Empowerment. But there are similar policies in that do exist across the world to address similar situations in that day. But like you said, the media plays a role in singing its praises, also singing its downfalls, and so hopefully we can get that also sorted and have, if I can say, like-minded or the guys with the right experience, knowledge, and actually know what they're talking about to get the message across, and also get organizations who've been through the process, the good and the bad, to their experiences out there as well.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Miguel, thank you so much for that. I think some really powerful words, some powerful advice, and also just setting the tone for 2025. As we are both looking forward to it, I'm sure that's going to be a great year for us as the Chamber, for our members, for our companies out there. So really appreciate your powerful messages that you've shared, and appreciate also your time, just sharing the knowledge that you have and the experience. We always like having these types of engagements, having these types of discussions, and as you know, as a team, we always debate things, discuss things, and always look forward to having these types of discussions. So thank you. To our viewers, thank you so much for joining us in our session today. We hope that you've had some good takeaways from our session today. We're looking forward to 2025. We hope that you are looking forward to 2025. We will be also launching our BBEE Chamber magazine very soon. So look out for the next edition. It's going to be issue number 5. And we're pretty excited about this next edition of our BBEE Chamber magazine. Some good content coming through, some external authors coming in and sharing their views and opinions on certain topics. And until next time, thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.